Well, this will be a little different today, different in terms of number of people around the table. You're used to the whole team being here, but today it's Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, and me. I'm Wayne Shepard, and Dave, we may be small in number, but we've got some important things to talk about.
We do, Wayne, and I love the full disclosure of what we do here on the public square. We are a little bit like, I don't know, this is Caleb and Joshua radio. We continue to enter into the promised land of truth-telling and look for the next mountain where the giants are. And so we continue to be taking on the establishments across our culture that need to be discussed, need to be brought out into the light of day. Well, we're little, okay, but we're not going to confess ourselves to be grasshoppers. We just do a lot of jumping around. And today we're jumping around with three of us on the air because we're doing a fire drill. We're doing methodology changes in how we produce this program. We have a whole bunch of stuff. We got lots of wires. We've got lots of microphones. And we've got lots of studios in different locations. And we continue to try to bring our team together in person all as often as possible through the year. But every now and then, we have to do a fire drill. We have to do a situation of saying, okay, if this breaks and that breaks and this breaks and that breaks, then how do we still produce a radio program for the nation to hear? So today, you're listening to an active fire drill. There's three of us because we're experimenting with some brand new technology that brings us together. And so it'll probably sound just like what you heard last week or what you're going to hear next week.
It shouldn't sound any different, actually.
Right. But we're having a blast doing this fire drill. Now, I got to be careful. I'm not really good at fire drills. When I was a kid in school, that's when I got in all the trouble during the fire drills.
Oh, no. I want to hear those stories.
Oh, man. And then, like, where I went to school, you get smacked around if you did the wrong thing. Like, I know what it feels like to take a drink at the end of a fire drill and, step out of the line because the fountain was right there and I was thirsty. And the next thing you know, wham! Oh, no. Wham with the right hand. So, yeah. So, anyhow, but this is a fire drill.
Well, and I was thinking about during this fire drill is I'm in studio at the American Mission Center, and Alan's not with us, so I'm looking for cords to find mics that work to plug into computers, and I can't seem to find it, and all I could hear in the back of my head was my dad. There's two things he'd always say. As I'm looking for something, and as a kid could never find it, he'd always say, if it was a snake, it would have bit you.
Yep. Oh,
that's
I heard
the first
that
thing
a million
he'd say.
times. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And the second is he was like, he'd always say, if I get up and I look for it and I find it, you're not getting it for a week. So do you want me to come find it or do you want to keep looking? And I'm sitting there thinking I got to find this cord somewhere. Took me longer than it should have, but Alan, you'll be happy to know I found the cord.
Yeah. And of course, you've not turned into your dad at all, have you?
We could write a whole book, Wayne, The World According to Bub. Yes.
Yeah. Plenty of notes written in my Bible of stories of my dad. Yeah.
All right, so we're also struggling with the titles for today's show. I think it's going to the working title is going to stick, which is "When Hippies Find Science," this is an interesting story, and it's not something that you're likely to hear anywhere else. So the news sources that we've pulled together are multiple, but it's not something that is circulating in a single article. There are multiple articles about what's happening now as we look toward 2026 and the politics that's coming at us in this very important midterm election. There's a group that's come forward. They've been around for a while. They've got an interesting history we'll get into in just a second. But they're called 314 Action. 314 Action. And they're a group that has dedicated themselves to getting at least 100 medical doctors elected into significant positions of public policy over the next several years, including electing governors and members of the House and the Senate who are physicians who are exclusively Democrats, exclusively leftist progressives. Project 314 Action. Most people have no idea that they exist. But they're out there. They're picking up a little bit of notice in the media. And we think it has a huge impact to talk about. And it's a bit of a classroom also because it will show us how what's happening in American politics is not on Fox News. It's not on MSNBC. It's not in the mainstream media network television shows. It's happening all behind the scenes and forwarding right to Election Day. Until you get to the booth and you see the names, you wouldn't even know what's happening. So we're going to talk about that today.
Okay. This is news to me. I didn't know about this, so I'm glad you're bringing it to our attention.
So, Rob, you work with iVoters. You've project managed iVoters for a number of years. People know we've had an active online voting information service since the very beginning, the first points of access when you could get online with an online voting product. We've been there. It goes back the whole way to what was originally called Decision 98. It quickly morphed into iVoters and iVoters.com. This is a public forum. It's a place where people gather. It's a conversation. It's events and meetings, but it's also a way of getting a tremendous amount of information about your ballot, your local ballot, and where candidates stand on the issues. It's completely nonpartisan. We don't take any money from candidates or political parties. And it's exceptionally controversial because it steps outside of the mainstream and talks to everybody like equals. Doesn't matter what your party is, no party, we don't care. We just want people to have information. So you've got a lot of experience in that arena. So tell us from your point of view about Project 314 or 314 Action.
314 Action, what interested me was it is relatively new, but how much it has grown in that short amount of time when it comes to the amount of money that it has raised and the amount of money that it's willing to spend to achieve its goal, to elect 100 physicians, 100 people committed to science, to public office. And when you look around the country at the places they want to have impact and influence, it's hard not to think back 5 years ago from this time when we were starting to see more medical professionals that were being leaned on and listened to when it comes to public policy. And I don't think it mattered at that point what credentials were or anything. People were like, you just need to listen to those folks. And they were kind of being labeled the smartest people in the room. So I guess 314 Action wants them to move from in front of the TV and the press conferences and the microphone to making decisions on your public policy.
Yeah, the premise of the whole thing, Wayne, is that American voters are not getting it, that they're not getting to the real science, that they've got clouded judgment, and that this band of progressive physicians, and my guess is that a bunch of them are what we call MPHs. They have Masters of Public Health as well. So they're doctors by training, but they're specializing in public health, which is basically public policy, and trying to turn what used to be a very private enterprise into a very government-run enterprise. So the MPH crowd, and they wear the lab coats. These are the people who showed up during COVID and basically tried to tell all the rest of us that we should really just sit down, shut up, and listen because they know the truth.
Well, and you read their mission on 314 Action, it's who we are. The first line says, we're the only organization in the nation focused on recruiting, training, and electing Democrats with a background in science to public office. That's what they're saying out loud to everyone in the first sentence.
So what's wrong with having scientists in Congress? Certainly nothing. The Republicans have got lots of doctors in the House and the Senate, and there's nothing new about that. I think one of the most qualified people in the civil government we have today is Rand Paul. He's a doctor. I believe he's an eye surgeon, in fact. A very qualified guy.
And many would argue that his father as well, who was a doctor, was qualified to serve all those years. I don't think there's anything wrong with medical professionals wanting to be in elected office, wanting to serve their communities.
And heaven knows we've brought doctors to testify often before government agencies and committees. I know Dr. McGowan and I have gone multiple times on a whole boatload of different issues, and if behind closed doors and in public hearings. So the idea of having the medical community actively involved just makes sense. There's no beef on our part with having that go on. But this isn't just about getting people who are skilled in the art and science of medicine. This is about people who are progressive leftists who have an agenda which is for science to basically become the controlling reality. And then, of course, the question becomes, so tell me more about science. How do you define science? What is your science? Where does it all come from? And all of a sudden, it gets pretty leftist and pretty creepy in a hurry. And it seems to all kind of take us back into the realm of COVID. So this is an agenda-driven organization. It isn't just about getting more lab coats in elected positions, because that would help balance things out. That's the mystique. The reality is this is a hardcore leftist deal. to try to get more and more people of a leftist point of view believing in government control over healthcare, believing in full nationalized healthcare, believing in taking away choices and decisions from people who came up in the COVID era and would like to stay there. That's what this is all about, Project 314.
Yeah, when you hear people say trust the science or follow the science, I think your question is exactly right, DZ. What is the science? What does that look like that you want everyone to follow? Because it's no secret, science has changed through the years. Things that 100 years ago that were considered science today would not be considered that much of science. So what does that look like? And I think these are the important questions we need to continue asking through all of this.
All right. Well, we've set the table on the public square here today. Let's take our first break, and when we come back, we'll dig into what we need to talk about. So you stay with us now here and online. You can always listen there at thepublicsquare.com.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
Introducing the latest program from The Public Square.
Kids on the Square.
We at Kids on the Square are dedicated to helping teach the next generation through topics like Bible stories, scientific marvels, and American history. We want to equip parents with fun and free educational resources to share the truth with their children. Won't you join us? New episodes are released monthly. You can listen wherever podcasts are available and visit kidsonthesquare.com to find out more. Thank you, and
Welcome to Kids on the Square.
We're joined together by this noble dream. Have you got that? So it's just all the good people, but the second line, part of this family, and the last line, we're joined together by this noble dream. Do that with me. This is a song for all the good people. Come on. All the good people who are part of this family. This is a song for all the good people. We're joined together by this noble dream. Well, this is a song for all of those dreamers. We're looking for answers to come our way. Scientists, doctors, students, all seekers. We share in the hopes for a much brighter day. Come on now. Well, this is a song for all the good people. All the good people who are part of this family. This is a song for all the good people. We're joined together by this noble.
Well, you may be scratching your head and possibly your ears too right now, but we are back with the Public Square, and yes, that was a part of our program here today. Not a normal part of our program, but nonetheless, there it is, Dave Zanotti.
We simply couldn't resist. And there's a lot to talk about with what you just heard, because if you peel it back, yeah, it was somebody doing a folk song. Kind of sounded like a little bit older person doing a folk song. And you probably flash back to the idea of somebody behind a microphone and a platform and signs and a crowd. And it's one of those old 1960s hippie rallies, right? In D.C.
Nanny, yeah.
Yeah. There it was. It sounded a little Barry Maguire-ish right there. And there they were. And this actually happened at a thing called the Stand Up for Science rally that happened recently, that is all connected to this political cause that we're talking about, getting Americans to come to terms with the science and electing people to public office who will make sure that that happens, who are professionals in the medical business, whether they're MPHs or whether they're MDs, but they're into the science. And it's time that we get back to governing ourselves according to the science. That's where this is all going. That person who was singing that song, I'm guessing that they probably wrote it as well, is Dr. Francis Collins. Does that name ring a bell for anybody?
Yeah, the Human Genome System, sure.
Dr. Francis Collins, the head of the National Institutes of Health during the COVID crisis. Pause for effect. Right? Dr. Francis Collins, who is no longer the head of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins, who the media has documented in multiple sources, was ferociously attempting to silence people who disagreed with NIH's and the CDC's attempts at locking down America in response to COVID. Dr. Francis Collins, who many people in the evangelical community embraced because of shared questions and answers on faith. And people thought this is a very safe person at the NIH, and we don't need to be worried. He's there and he's going to do the right thing, who suddenly became extraordinarily controversial as far as what was the right thing during the pandemic. Right? This is a very, and he's the guy who's up there strumming along, singing that song, the song for all the people. Now, this is like truth is stranger than fiction right here.
It is, especially when you think about, they talk about the willingness and they want the opportunity to rally because that they felt that was going against the current administration's change in policy when it comes to science and some of the things that they're trying to do. And again, I'm always left scratching my head because if we had the opportunity to talk to Francis Collins, if we had the opportunity to ask questions, to have them define what science means and what does that look like? And when you rewind the tape and go back 5 years, what changes or what would you have done differently when it comes to COVID and the pandemic in regards to science? What would that look like? It would be interesting to hear them talk about if the science, in their opinion, has changed.
COVID was a very difficult time, and it was about a lot more than a virus. And as history unfolds, people are just now beginning to become comfortable talking about it out loud. First off, I think they're no longer afraid of recriminations. Secondly, they've been away from it long enough to think back and try to put it in perspective and say, wait a second. You know, the New York Times came out with a piece recently. It just came out they did 30 charts that show how America has never been the same since COVID. And it's fascinating.
Those charts are, well, I know we're going to do a show sometime on those charts, and I would love to dive into those charts because it leaves you just going, kind of like, wow.
Things like education and how that changed prices, how they changed people's work habits, the Great Resignation period in which people decided to change careers because they just weren't going to put up with it. I mean, all the people that got dumped from COVID. I mean, what the COVID response from the medical scientific experts did to American hospitals is a story that still has not been told. Hospital administrators talking off the record behind closed doors will tell us about a hospital system firing 1,000 frontline people who had already gotten COVID, had already developed immunities, did not want to take the shot because they didn't need it. These are medical professionals, all of whom got fired in just one hospital system in the Midwest. Just one. And this was going on all over the country, so that today hospitals are so desperate for healthcare professionals to work for them because they abused them so malignantly during COVID. They won't come back.
No, and when you think about the United States of America, I guess when you look through history, has there ever been a time, obviously I'm sure some people would go back to the 1800s and say, yes, the Civil War, but outside the Civil War, where crossing state lines, people were treated so much differently from one state to the other, as far as the experience goes and what was allowed and what was permitted. And, I'm still thinking back to, I believe it was in North Carolina where they had a protest and a rally outside of Raleigh. And, the police, they quickly deleted the tweet, but they put out on social media, I think it was via Twitter at the time, that wasn't one of the approved activities, is protesting. And people were like, wait a minute here. Do you remember those documents from a few hundred years ago? Can we talk about those? Because that's what you saw is so many things. So many people tried to play the role of dictator.
It was a creepy, scary time, but particularly if we were studying it in the context of the flu, the Spanish flu of 1918 and all of that time period. You go back and look at that and read the books and the studies with historical analysis, and you go, boy, they made a lot of mistakes back then, which now they openly, candidly talk about. So what's the relevance to this? Well, the same people, Dr. Francis Collins, the same guy strumming the guitar at the Stand Up for Science rally, are the same people that are coordinating in many ways, the same kinds of people with the same thought patterns with 314 action and the political agendas to place, in essence, the COVID team into public life and into public office because they want that control. They think that America is going to be better when their view of science is controlling American public policy. Now, they had a shot. And they had a shot with authority that we have never seen since the early 1900s. And Rob, you talk about the state-by-state travel. Wayne, I know you travel a lot, and we travel a lot through the United States because of the different organizations we serve and the different offices that we have. My wife and I literally had to establish plans by which we would travel at night and go through access points crossing state boundaries that were not being guarded. Because some states just said, if you're coming from one state to another, you have to have a 7 to 14-day quarantine period to come into our state. We didn't have any choice. We had to get through that state to get to another. And this was like living in the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. I remember one of those early weeks in March of 2020. I was invited somewhere on the east side of Cleveland, and it was a beautiful day, and there was no one on the roads. And I was driving the roads, and I can remember the state troopers, like in the median, probably every 5, 6, 7 miles. And I'd never felt anything like that before. You're traveling on roads, you travel all the time. There's no one on the roads, and there's a police presence, and you're like, and it was that intimidation factor, like, hey, you probably shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. But I mean, and that's what it was set up to be, that intimidation, that maybe you wouldn't do it, that maybe you'd yield and sit back. And again, they're asking you to trust the science. Remember, 15 days to flatten the curve or whatever. They didn't even have science on their side, but they made it up as they went along to lead you to believe they did.
Let's talk about that. That's a good point. Let me just, I know we're got to get to a break. Talk about the science. One of the things that happened in the state of Ohio was that they went to Ohio State University and created all kinds of models, and the governor and his director of Department of Health would present those models every day and tell us how bad things are going to get if we didn't listen to them. We got a little tired of that, so we actually took their models and we basically retro-engineered them and then built them out and put the math together and projected them out. And they projected out into mathematical absurdity. And we went back and said, who made these models up? Well, we could tell you after the break the story that we discovered.
All right, so stay tuned for that, and we'll continue this discussion with Dave Zanotti and Rob Walgate today on the Public Square. I hope you've downloaded the free app that we've made available to everyone. It's a beautiful little tool to listen to the Public Square anytime you need to listen at your convenience. It's called, guess what? The Public Square. It's free in your app store.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square.
Every day, people across the nation contribute to the mission of the Public Square. Because of those gifts, this broadcast is now heard on the radio coast to coast every day. Thousands are finding the path to true liberty every day because of the support of listeners just like you. Your gifts of any and every size are reaching lives today. Thank you for your support.
Glad you're with us for this edition of the Public Square. When hippies discover science, is that title still holding true here today, Dave?
Oh, yeah. You look at that Rally for Science event and Francis Collins there strumming the guitar. I felt like I was back in the 60s. It just, except now it's science. You know, Wayne, I think something else needs to be said. When you study Francis Collins, you do a little internet research, you'll find out that he was one of the most active people in attempting to get Director Fauci and others to censor those that were criticizing the science, challenging the science that was driving the CDC. And there are some embarrassing emails that are out there in public, and they're obvious and they're important. One of the people they were trying to silence was one of the signers of the Great Barrington Declaration, which was something that many professional researchers and physicians and epidemiologists put together and signed saying the government policy that we're seeing is not accurate. This is, and then they challenged the premises of how we were dealing with COVID. They did it from a scientific point of contention. And one of the people that signed that is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Bhattacharya at a big event in Washington, D.C. last year where he received an award from the Bradley Foundation, along with Dr. William B. Allen, one of our trustees here at the American Policy Roundtable. It was a very prestigious event honoring people of profound scholarship and science. Well, Dr. Bhattacharya holds 2 PhD-level degrees. He's got a PhD in economics, and he's an epidemiologist. He's an MD. So he's got 2 postgraduate degrees. He's at Stanford. This is not some little, fringe individual here. In fact, it was Dr. Bhattacharya that Francis Collins was coming after, and his connection with the Barrington Declaration and others. So this is all a matter of public record. Well, interestingly enough, Dr. Bhattacharya is now the new director of the National Institute of Health, the old job Francis Collins had. So it's interesting how this is all unfolding. So you can see the political backlash that the people who were into the COVID world are fighting back because they've lost their platform of power. But let's go back to Ohio. Rob, remember those days in the state of Ohio? Remember the dynamic duo?
Oh, yeah. People, they had a bunch of different names for what would happen every day in the afternoon when Governor DeWine and Dr. Amy Acton would get on the television. Some people called it Wine with DeWine, and some people, they had a bunch of
the
names
Mike and Amy
for it.
Show. Yeah.
Yes. Every
we
day.
always say beware of governors when they put on windbreakers. They become very dangerous to the Constitution. So, go ahead, Rob.
Well, and you think about the things that were happening and the mandates that they were laying down. And Ohio was an interesting example because of the fact you had a Republican governor that would portray himself as being conservative, but with someone who would consider themselves very leftist when it comes to science and political views running his Department of Health and yielding to her and what she wanted. I mean, even going as far in Ohio, they canceled an election. They canceled a primary election. They went to a judge to have it done through the judge, and the judge basically said, "Get out of my courtroom. I am not signing this. I am not going along with this. We're not canceling the election." I believe it was on March 17th, 2020. And so they issued basically an order from the Department of Health shutting down the
Department of Health
primary election.
Trying to use language from 100 years ago, basically, and saying that based on the danger, that it was too dangerous to hold an election. Well, this wasn't just for one office. This was for all kinds of offices, state and federal offices. And they shut down an election by the fiat statement of the director of the Department of Health. So this was all being driven by the science. And we, by the way, were not simply on the outside throwing rocks at this system. Whether it was Ohio or Tennessee or other states where we had opportunities, we went behind the closed doors, behind the scenes. We attempted to speak with people in power and in authority and ask them to please consider the thoughts of doctors like Dr. McGowan, Dr. Bhattacharya, others who were saying, hey, well, you don't have to go this far. There's some real simple science here, like Governor. You don't have to close all the swimming pools because the last place you could get COVID would be in a swimming pool because of the chlorine and the chemicals. Look at the science. Everybody knows that. All right? But the fear was, well, if you've got people gathering, it's too dangerous. Well, wait, okay, you take their temperature on the way in, but why shouldn't healthy people be allowed to swim in a safe environment? Stuff like this. But everything was just...
And it fires me up. Sorry, Dave, that I think about, when they shut down the schools and educational opportunities were taken away from young people. And then you look at the decline that's happened in the last 5 years. We've seen the educational gap in essence, between the haves and some would say between the haves and have-nots has grown even more despairingly. But I think about in many of those urban areas where kids were not permitted to go to school, then the health department went to the parks and they took down basketball hoops. They put wooden planks over the rims so you couldn't shoot. They took down swings. And we're talking about outside. Now we're talking about into the spring when the weather's nice. Science did not tell them to do those things. They
Rob,
did it.
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
I mean, science didn't tell them to do those things. You think about in golf courses where they said you can't even touch the flag. I mean, you think about all these things where science wasn't the driving force. In essence, and a lot of times it was fear that was the driving force. And we'd seen what the virus had done in China and other countries across the world as it's weighed its way to the United States. And we didn't follow the science.
So let's talk one more example before we go back to the politics of this. When the Ohio models came out, because we have obviously our national headquarters is in Ohio, and we've been doing business in there and in service in there for 45 years. So we've got some pretty good connections, and we've got some, God's given us some windows of opportunity, wonderful staff around the country. But we knew this was a place that we could really dig in because we had a lot of friends behind closed doors and behind the scenes. So when the governor and his director of health came forward and said, here's the models. Here's why we need all of you to accept us closing your schools. Here's why you need to accept us telling you who is preferred and non-preferred essential business. Why you need to stop swimming in the pools. Why you need to stop moving altogether. So they gave us the numbers. If you do what we tell you to do, here's what the curve will look like. If you don't do what we tell you to do, here's what the curve will look like. Well, a number of us went ahead and got those numbers. And we built out the algorithms, we built out the physics, we built out the projections, we built out the math, and the numbers were absolutely absurd. It was like, if you don't do what we say, everybody is going to die. And it's like, we started to pass this around to doctors and to epidemiologists and to people who are experts in this field. And they said, who made this stuff? So we started to ask. It was Ohio State University made this stuff. So then, Wayne, we did a FOIA request to try to figure out all the meetings, all the conferences, all the things that would have happened for that study to make it continually in these afternoon Mike and Amy shows, continuing terrifying people with these. And when we got through all the FOIA requests, we got about 6 pieces of paper back. Basically, no one would admit that there were any meetings ever held, any conversations ever held, any phone calls ever held. It's simply the Ohio State University created the file, they handed it to the governor's people, and out it went on the air without any real scientific rigor into the reality of those models. And they controlled people with those models.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, let's talk more about this important issue on the public square today. And before we're finished, we'll talk about things that we can do in response to what we're hearing on the public square. So you stay tuned for that and more. And by the way, our website is always available to you 24/7. Lots of resources there, including the audio of this program if you joined us late. thepublicsquare.com.
We will be right back for more on the public square. Ever feel like your voice just doesn't get heard? Politics isn't just for the important people who you see on TV or hear on the news. Politics is for everyone. Don't get discouraged. You're not alone. For almost 30 years, the Roundtable has been helping people get informed and make a difference. The first step is to get the facts. The Roundtable Monthly Update is a great place to start. This important update can be sent to your home every month, helping you know what's going on behind the scenes and how you can leverage your impact. Thousands are reading the Roundtable Update every month. Why not join them? To get your first copy of the Roundtable Update, log on today to aproundtable.org.
And we're back with the Public Square today. Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, and Wayne Shepard, the team behind the mics. And As I learned about this movement, it's really a political movement, isn't it, Dave? What's it called? 314?
314 and 314 Action. Now, it's named after the numerical, the number for pi.
Yeah,
PI.
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
PI, the number for pi is 314. So it's 3.14 is the actual number for. So that's it. It's the catchy. These are the scientific. These are really smart people. These are people that know math.
And who doesn't like pi, right? Okay.
Right.
I get it.
Okay.
All right. Now, my point is this. It sounds like there's a pretty limited scientific viewpoint that's allowed in this organization. It's not the fact that you're a doctor or a scientist, but you have to conform to this particular set of views about science.
That's a wonderfully put statement, Wayne, because science is built upon inquiry and questions, but this kind of science is built on mandates, even dictates. Yes, you have to be of only one political party, you have to be of only one philosophy, and it's manifesting itself now in people that are actually going to be running for office coming up in 2026.
Well, science has become controversial, too. I mean, just think about when Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown was in front of her for the committee for a confirmation process. And she was asked, what is a woman? And she refused to answer the question. She dodged it and maneuvered around it, basically said she wasn't a doctor, so she couldn't answer it. Now, if rewind the tape 20 years ago, if we'd have told you that would be a controversial question, I don't think anyone would believe it. But here we are. And what is the science when it comes to that?
So, Rob, who are some of the people we can expect? Well, I know better. I know the answer to this question. There's a big reveal in regards to where Pi 314 Project of Action is going.
Yeah, 314 Action in the state of Ohio, running for governor in 2026 on the Democratic ticket, announced in the primary, will be Dr. Amy Acton, who was Mike DeWine's sidekick, a Republican governor, current governor of the state of Ohio. She is running on the Democrat ticket for governor in 2026. So she obviously has great name recognition around the state of Ohio. Can she win the Democrat primary? We will find out. What's been interesting through this process of her announcing that she's running is the fact that they talked about, because she stepped away. She stepped away, I believe it was the summer of 2020. And one of the reasons she stepped away, it's been revealed in some media sources, is there was disagreement on opening state fairs. And she didn't feel like the science backed the opening of state fairs. Now you think about the state fair, you're outside, it's the middle of summer, it's warm, it's hot. And she didn't feel that was going to be okay. And Ohioans had enough of people telling them they weren't leaving their homes. And if you would have attempted in the 88 counties of Ohio to say, no one's holding county fair, that would have created major issues.
So she is now way up high on the priorities of 314 Action. Amy Acton of the Mike and Amy Show, the director of the Department of Health, who basically did the bidding of the Republican governor who canceled elections unconstitutionally and illegally, who shut people down in their homes, who were a participant in the philosophy that the people are the virus. The people are the problem. That's why you shouldn't be allowed to move, because you're the problem. All of that stuff, she's now coming out to run for governor of the state of Ohio.
Well, Dave, you make a great point. You say about the people being the problem. No one was saying COVID didn't exist. No one was saying that COVID wasn't real. It's just no one could prove the point that if you stayed locked down in your home for 3 months, that then 3 months later, COVID was still going to be there. It was still going to have an impact. It was going to, natural immunity was going to have to run its course for that virus to take place. It was fascinating to see doctors not treat this virus as every virus throughout history had been treated when it came to immunity.
Wayne, it's fascinating to me that American politics is heading in 2026 into a referendum on COVID. And the people whose policies failed, the people who now have to admit sheepishly at best that most everything that they said really didn't work, and we still have all kinds of questions that are unsettled about the way we behaved during that time, are now saying they need power more power and need to be elected officials, and we need 100 of them in Congress or 100 of them in governorships and state Senate seats. They want more power because they believe science is the answer. And we just learned from COVID how they define science.
If Congress was a Democrat majority, would this 314 exist?
What a powerful question you're asking, because that really does bespeak the whole core of this situation is how wedge issues get used by political parties to drive people into office for times and seasons so that the political party can recapture control. In other words, this is a wedge issue. This is what Melanie Elsey would call the wrapping paper. Mm-hmm. This is a way to get people organized based on their prior fears and intimidate people and move all the chairs around so that at the end of the day, one political party or the other political party prevails. And why do they want to prevail? Because whoever prevails on those political parties will have control of state and federal budgets. And that means a lot to the medical community in regards to grants and loans and big pharma and all of those connections. This is a categorical special interest without doubt. And they're coming together. In addition to that, there's something else we have to talk about, and that's these pop-up PACs that show up and these pop-up news sites that show up. And this is going to be new information for a lot of people. So we're going to walk through this and we're going to talk about it a lot. There are foundations driven by people like Melinda Gates. There are people like George Soros, Bloomberg. There the Center for American Progress, John Podesta. There are left-wing organizations that have tremendous amounts of money. And they are creating pop-up organizations, whether they're PACs, whether they're news sites, whether they're websites that look like a news site. And their whole goal in doing these things is to buttress political campaigns that will give the Democrat or the Republican Party power. Both sides are doing it. Now, the Democrats seem to have perfected it and are spending a great deal more money than what we can tell from anything in the conservative community. But the reality is, most of, Wayne, what we're hearing and what we're seeing out there in regards to what looks like news is coming from these pop-up sites. It's coming from these political blurbs that get this big bunch of money. And then suddenly they're in play. They've got candidates. They've got news sites. They've got experts. They're singing folk songs at rallies for science. And it's all being funded by special interest entities, the goal to get power in Congress, in the governor's offices, and in state lawmakers.
So this is much more broad than just this one particular group. This is happening everywhere.
It is. This is one prime example that's got its own music already, so I thought would be the best one to look at.
Okay.
And I also remember when the left used to say that money and politics combined together were bad. Yet in today's world, the left is outspending everybody when it comes to political action.
All right, we have a few seconds before we take our break, but coming up, we do want to talk about what to do after hearing this conversation today, right, Dave?
We do, Wayne, and this is not a hopeless situation. It's just coming out of the starting gates, and we're glad to get people into the information flow right from the start, because there are ways we can respond to this.
All right, we'll come back to that. On most of these stations, practically all, there are a couple of stations that have to cut away at this time. If that's yours, please listen to the rest of our program online at thepublicsquare.com or use that handy smartphone app to listen anytime at your convenience.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square. Let's see, there's our tithe, food and clothing budget, taxes, all the insurance, and the car payments. Where's the line in your budget that helps pay the bill for fixing what's wrong in America? Log on today at aproundtable.org and join the growing team that's giving every month to get America back on track. Make your monthly contribution to aproundtable.org. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
Rob and Dave have introduced us to pi here today, 314. Actually, I looked it up. Pi is actually 3.14159 265-358-9793. You want me to keep going?
Into infinity and beyond.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's a mathematical constant that represents the ratio. I'm no mathematician. I'm just showing off reading the internet here. The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter.
And this is where you miss John Lennox not being with us right there.
Oh, my goodness.
Someone who's in love with mathematics and the philosophy of
couldn't
mathematics.
keep up at all with John, no.
Yes, yes. Oh, John Lennox is in our library, by the way. It's one of the beautiful things about the public squares. We've been doing programming. It's in our program library at thepublicsquare.com. You can go back and find programs we've done with John Lennox, and they're absolutely fascinating. In fact, I'm always reminded when I think about C.S. Lewis, and it's one of the things I wanted to bring up in this segment, is that John Lennox is one of the people who heard C.S. Lewis's last lecture in person.
Amazing, huh?
Yeah. How cool is that?
Cool.
And so John's a professor at Oxford and has written a number of books. Another dear friend of Wayne Shepherd's, who was introduced to the public square through you, Wayne.
Not sure how good of friends we are. I love John Lennox, but his claim to fame, of course, is the uncle of Keith and Kristen Getty. It was Kristen Lennox. So she is John's niece.
I thought you were going to say, and he's the one who debated Dawkins at the God Delusion debate. But the Gettys,
all the above, right?
But the Gettys way outclassed the Dawkins debate. So okay.
Yeah.
So the question that we come to is, C.S. Lewis talked about it this way in That Hideous Strength, and in many papers and comments and lectures, he talked about the conditioners, the people of science. And if you think about the last book of the space trilogy C.S. Lewis produced called That Hideous Strength, it was a media and scientific takeover of culture. The scientists needed the media to tell the story, to frighten the people, and then to direct the people, and then to control the people. So the lead character in the book, That Hideous Strength, is named Mark Studdock, and Mark is a journalist who goes to work for the NICE, the N-I-C-E.
Nice.
Yes, which was the national
acronym ever produced, right?
Yes, nice. and which was the national healthcare system of the book of That Hideous Strength. Years later, of course, the British socialized, nationalized healthcare system would be called the NICE, N-I-C-E, ironically. So Lewis wrote this in 1945. At the end of World War II, projecting what he saw that was the surviving danger of that conflict that was not really resolved, which was the conditioners, the social conditioners. What would happen when technology and science would enable the conditioners to control what people are thinking? Real threat. We saw it in COVID. If you look at those 30 charts from the New York Times, what you'll see is the economic and socioeconomic consequences of what we did in that brief 2-year period of time are still being felt today. Our economy is still not recovered. Our businesses are not recovered. Our employment has not been recovered. Our educational system has not been recovered. When people move together under the control of scientific conditioners, you got to be really careful. Now, we're not anti-science. We're just anti-dictators.
And we're seeing what happens when you just hit print on the printer when it comes to money. And I know they didn't print it out as much as they transferred it electronically, but we're seeing the economic repercussions of that, and we will for years to come.
There's so many things to go around, and so many things we don't know. So there's a new administration and a very different approach. The irony of Jay Bhattacharya becoming the National Institute of Health director, replacing Francis Collins, while Francis Collins goes out a la the hippies of the 60s, strumming his guitar for all the people. And then all that's going now around with 314 Action, Project Action, and all the other pop-up packs and pop-up sites. This is where the fight for 2026 is going to be played. Now, I don't know if they even have the slightest chance of succeeding with that unless people don't know what's happening. And that's why we're here. We've picked these stories up from multiple sources. But what you'll find is there's not a controlling document that's out there. Now, maybe it'll appear after the show that documents what we're talking about right now. This is what's going on behind the scenes right now.
And I encourage all our listeners to go to 314 Action, go to their website, read their mission statement, see the candidates they support, look at some of the statements they've made in regards to science, and you're going to be scratching your head and say, well, wait a minute. What I learned science was back in school as far as a hypothesis and a test and everything that goes along with it, that isn't what these folks are talking about all the time. A lot of times they're spreading, I mean, when we think about COVID, spreading a lot of fear.
You know, Wayne, Rob, I looked at the FEC filings now, and I'm trying to remember these groups went from about 0 to 12 to 20 million in really fast order in regards to funding. It reminds us of some of the stories that have now come out in regards to other organizations under the Green New Deal, which was actually the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, for 20 years, we've been talking about John Podesta. And we've been asking Americans to please investigate, pay attention to John Podesta, the Center for American Progress, the former chief of staff of Bill Clinton. We call him the longest serving president in the history of the country. He's been in more White Houses or run more presidential campaigns. He's been there forever. At the end of the Biden administration, John Podesta sat in the White House and directed checks in billions of dollars coming across his attention span because he took over for John Kerry as the climate czar. He also then sat there in the White House and directed the funding mechanism to spend hundreds of billions of dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act that were dedicated toward the Green New Deal, and just started to fund organizations that, one of them, what did it go, Rob? It had $0 the year before, and it went to $2 billion?
Yeah, there's billions of dollars that are just being dispersed by someone who's not an elected official, right. By someone who's just been
and
the
was
door's
not
been
confirmed
open,
by the United States
not
Senate
confirmed.
either. Right.
There's no appointment there. It's just the door was open. Come on in, and you do with these funds what you think is best. And obviously, what he thinks is best hasn't benefited the country.
Now, it's not a fair fight, but it never has been. Right. But that doesn't mean it's not a fight that shouldn't be fought or one that can't be won. The truth will always set us free. And what we're trying to get to here is the truth. Now, some of these things are highly suspect. Most of them are legal and very clever. The difference is there are people who want the power, who use every edge they can to get there. And they raise every dollar they can from special interest organizations to drive this train, and they're already onto it. So our job is to sound the alarm. And the more people who hear this broadcast who are able to look through these documents and understand how they're being manipulated, well, that truth can set us free. We don't fear here that the bad guys are ever ultimately going to win. We don't believe that because we believe truth will triumph. We truly do, because there is a God in the universe who still cares about what happens in this world. Now, we're not saying he's on our side. We're only hoping that we would be fortunate enough to be on his. But we know one thing for sure, the truth will prevail. So we're trying to open some doors here.
Yeah. Someone said to me in a different context recently that, well, God's will be done. And my response was, well, he expects us to do our part in fulfilling his will. So
Amen.
It's a good, not to get too theological on us here, but I really believe that.
No, I do too, Wayne, and we have a role to play here. That's why God left us here. Didn't just save us and then say, okay, you're done. No, we have a job here. There's a great commission to teach Jesus and all that he teaches, and justice is a big part of that.
Yeah. Rob, final word on this group?
Well, I'm just thinking about the Great Commission, and when he says go, I mean, that there's a command there for us. We have to go. There's action that takes on our part. So I echo the words that both of you just said.
All right, that'll wrap up this week's edition of The Public Square. Our special thanks to Jonah Jackson, who's always on the scene here, but especially so this week. So, Jonah, thanks for your help, and thank you all for listening. You can share this program very easily by sharing the link. Just put in thepublicsquare.com and tell your friends to listen this week, or use the smartphone app, The Public Square. Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, thank you. Team, thank you. We'll see you all next time on The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.